Okay, good morning, everybody. We are holding Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis. This is 27b at the top of the page. We're starting with the Mishnah. The first Mishnah on the page. Ein Meichrin Shel Rabim Liyochid. Okay, says the Mishnah. Ein Meichrin Es Shel Rabim Liyochid. When we're talking about a shul over here, that is a shul that belongs to the public, you're not allowed to sell it to an individual to serve as his own private shul. This is because by doing this, you're going to demote from its level of holiness. Why? Because what's going to ultimately happen is in this synagogue where you used to have Kedusha and Kaddish, all the things that you can only do in 10, when it becomes private, you're not going to do that. You're not going to have all these things that can only be done with a minyan, and that's diminishing its Kedusha. These are the words of Reb Meir. Amrullah, so the Chachamim said to Reb Meir, Im Kain, if you're going to say that any kind of sale that results in a lessening of the Kedusha is going to be prohibited, then from a large city to a small city, which means to say if there's a shul that belongs to a large city and they want to sell it to a small city, so then it should be forbidden. Why? Because also you're diminishing the Kedusha. So
Rabbi, what do you mean by large city to small city?
I know it's
taking this apart, or you selling the element, the yarn, the chair.
It's a good question. I think what it means is that if the synagogue, right, in the big city decides that they no longer need this property and they decide they want to sell the property and transfer the kedusha, right, of that to another shul, but now
it says another city, not another shul.
Right? No, I know. So so it seems like the smaller city buys this synagogue. In other words, they own the property now, right? And they then somehow either take the materials and they transfer it to build a smaller shul, or they take they themselves take the proceeds and they use it to build a smaller synagogue. But the point is that this thing somehow transfers over to becoming a small synagogue in a small city. Right. What makes most sense to me, personally, is that they take the materials and they transfer it and transfer it to
the value of the property, whatever they sold it for, they take with them.
Right. Right, but no. What I think is that they actually transfer the materials,
yes,
right? The bricks and the Arna Kodesh and the benches and everything else,
Balaam and the yard side boards and everything.
Everything, yeah. They take everything and they transfer it to a small.
They're still selling that property. You can't take the building with you.
Right. Well, no. But what I'm saying is, what if they take the actual bricks and mortar from the shul? Yes, Ben.
The last few years, there were quite a few shuls that closed up. What's the story about buying things from those shuls? Which we did, some of the shuls did buy from them.
So what's wrong with that? You're doing?
But you're saying it's not allowed to sell a Torah. Can we buy a Torah from that shul?
The question is, what are they going to do with the money? What are they going to do with the money?
I have no idea.
That's a question. I'm not sure. I'm sure.
Okay, I just
sure that these people.
Because in our area, they closed about 3 shuls a couple of years ago.
I'm sure that competent rabbis were consulted and they gave them the correct advice on how to go about it. Okay, so now
Rabbi, A quick
Yes.
question. I missed the preceding Gemara. How does this topic that we're discussing now fit into Menachem Megilla?
Because that's a good question. So what happened was we were talking about reading the Megillah, then we talked about the laws of reading a Sefer Torah, and then once we talked about the laws of a Sefer Torah, we started to discuss the laws of selling a Sefer Torah and selling other Tashmishi Kedusha, other things out of Kedusha, and including selling a synagogue. That's how we got here.
And where does it fit better?
Exactly. Okay. So says the Gemara, Shapi Komri Le Rabbanan Leremeya. It seems that the Chachamim, the rabbis, answered Remeya very well by saying, if you, Rebbe Meir, are going to tell me that you cannot sell a synagogue that belongs to the community to an individual because you're going to go down in Kedusha, so you should never be able to sell a synagogue from a large town to a small town. Frank the Gemara of Rebbe Meir. So what's Rebbe Meir going to answer to this question of the Chachamim? So the Gemara answers, Meir Gedoyla Le'ir Ketana, when a synagogue is being transferred from a large city to a small city, Mi'ikra Kadisha, Hashtanami Kadisha. Before the transaction, the shul was sacred, and now afterwards it's also sacred, which means to say that the idea of saying Kaddish in Kedusha and Baruch Hu in a big city is still going to continue in the small city. So therefore, the Kedusha, although you're not going to have the same number of people there, but you're still going to have the Kedusha remaining. But Mirabim Liyachid, when it comes to selling from the public to an individual, there, Leki Kedusha, there's not going to be any Kedusha because you're not going to have the Devarim should be Kedusha that you can without less than 10 people. So that's why Remeir would say that there's a difference between the two. Right? Okay, so the Gemara says, one of the rabbis is going to answer. So the Gemara says, the Chacham say back to Rabbi Meir, if you have to be concerned that it's going to be reduced in its level of kedusha, as the Meir says, then in such a case where you're going from a big city to a small city, you also have to be concerned that there's going to be a lower level of kedusha, mishum, because of this concept of barav am hadras melech, that with the multitude of the people is the glory of the king, which means to say that there's always a greater mitzvah and a greater sanctification of Hashem's name when you have more people inside the shul. If there are less people, then it's going to be lesser kedusha, less honor of Hashem. So therefore, once you're going to start telling me that you have to be worried about the diminishing of the kedusha, then you've got to follow it through all the way. And even to a big city, it wouldn't be possible to sell it to a small city. And that's why the Chacham disagree with Remeya and says that if you're going to sell it, right, you could sell it from a rabbin to a yachid as well. Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. A noichen beis knesses, you cannot sell a beis knesses elo al tanai, only on condition, which means to say the only way you're allowed to sell a shul is if you tell the person buying it, I want to retain the rights to buy it back. Which means to say we're under difficult times right now, and we don't have a choice, but we have to sell it. The only way we're going to be selling it to you is on condition that if we get the funds that we need, we'll be able to buy it back. Which means so that if the townspeople want, the buyers have to return it to them when they come along and want to buy it. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. The Chacham say, no. You can sell the shul permanently and unconditionally. However, the only 4 things which we're going to see are very demeaning, right? For those things, you're not allowed to sell it. You're not allowed to sell a shul. So what are these 4 things? Lemerchatz for a bathhouse, ulevursaki and a tannery, litvila for a mikvah, ulebeis hamayim or as a laundry, or another interpretation is for urinals where you're going to use it as a bathroom. So those four things are things that you're not allowed to sell a shul to be used as. Okay, that's what the Chacham say. The Chacham say you don't need to make it tonight, but when it comes to selling it, you can sell it for anything else but these four things. Rabbi Yehuda says, here's what you should do. Should sell it to be used as a courtyard. And then the buyer, he could do with it whatever he wants. In other words, when you're selling it, you should be selling it as to this owner as a courtyard. And he then subsequently, after he's made the purchase, he can choose to do whatever he wants with it. Okay, that is the Mishnah.
Right.
Now,
Rabbi,
yeah.
isn't so, I mean, I'm sorry, but when you're saying, according to him, he's going down in Kedusha by selling it to become a courtyard.
That's true. What
That's
we're
a
saying
problem.
is, no, what we're saying is that Rabbi Meir is the only one who says you cannot sell a shul if it's going to go down in Kedusha. Everyone else is of the opinion that once you sell a shul, right, then the money can be transferred, the Kedusha can be transferred onto the money, and then the shul no longer retains any Kedusha. And so therefore, you can do whatever you want with it. However, there's just a certain restriction that if you know that it's going to be turned into a tannery, or you know it's going to be turned into a bathhouse or something of that nature, which is a degrading use of the property, then one shouldn't sell a synagogue directly to be used for a tannery. So then what should you do? So Rabbi Yehuda says what you could do is you sell it as to be used as a courtyard, and then whatever the buyer does, he does with it. But everybody is of the opinion that you can, besides Rabbi Meir, everybody's of the opinion that you could sell something and the Kedusha from the shul can be transferred onto the money, and then the building, the bricks and mortar of that synagogue doesn't retain any Kedusha. That's what their opinion is. Make sense? That's their opinion. The opinion is,
I mean,
yeah.
I guess I must be more in the Meir's,
You agree with Rebbeah? Fair enough.
I mean, I understand you can sell it, transfer the money, the Kedusha onto the money. That's fine. We've learned about that in other situations. Okay.
Right.
But even so,
it doesn't sit right. It doesn't sit right because you have the principle of Kedusha Eina Zozam Im Kema. Kedusha doesn't move from its place. So seemingly one should be acting in a more respectful manner with the synagogue. But nevertheless, when it comes to matters of halacha, right, we don't get to decide what feels good or what doesn't feel good. The Chachamim are the ones who are keveya when something does have kedusha, when it doesn't have kedusha, and they can come along and they can stipulate that the kedusha that is chal, the kedusha that rests upon a shul, right, is with a stipulation, right, that if the shul is ever sold, that kedusha is uprooted from the place and transferred to another place. That's the koyach of the chachamim. That's not something.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
Let me.
Kedusha of the.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yitzchok. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to ask. On a practical basis.
Yeah.
You have a building that was a shul, whatever. Now it comes up to Shiloh. Can we sell it? Can we sell it?
Yeah.
We always say the chachamim. I'm just trying to think on a practical level. Let's say we lived in Eretz Yisrael right now. Okay, time Mashiach's here, so we're in charge. We go to the chachamim in our city to have a bezdin or to have. How does this work? Who's going where? And if somebody wants to appeal it, what I'm asking is, you go to what? Chacham, you go to 3, you go to 23. For the appeal, you go to Yerushalayim immediately to the Sanhedrin. What's the logistics of how our legal system works with questions like this? Property question. Are we allowed to sell the building or not?
So this is addressed in Masechah Sanhedrin, and it seems that depending on how big your city is, you'll have your own Sanhedrin. If you have, I think, 120 people or something, well, I don't remember exactly the exact number, then you have your own Sanhedrin. And it's that Sanhedrin that you turn to for such questions. Now, if the Shaila, that the Sanhedrin themselves don't feel equipped to answer, then they themselves send shluchim to the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim. But it seems that in each city, right, you defer to the local Sanhedrin, the local Bezdin, to decide for you in such matters.
And these are 23 people
That's
from
right.
the community.
That's
Who
right.
picks this Sanhedrin?
It seems that they're actually appointed by the Sanhedrin Agdela in Yerushalayim. They're the ones that appoint these. The
And who picks them?
who picks the Sanhedrin Agdela?
Yeah.
My understanding is that you have the Sanhedrin that were appointed by Moshe Rabbeinu, and then they in turn had students, and when students moved up the rank, when the students moved up the rank, they moved up in rows, and once they get to the end of the row, when a new space comes available, the one at the end of the row just gets pushed up. Another instance is where they say that interestingly, when there's a capital case and one of the students has a schus for the one who is for the defendant, if he comes and offers that schus, right? There's a discussion whether if there was some substance to what he said, he gets elevated to the Sanhedrin. Some say he never goes down. Once he goes up, he never comes down. So these are different ways of how they're appointed.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but it makes it come a lot more alive when I get an idea of how you actually do this.
No problem.
Thank you.
Really?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Isn't a mikveh have more kedusha than a tannery or a bathroom? I mean,
Yeah.
there are there's some big Knessets, and even a shtibel that I know here in Miami. I mean, I believe they have a mikveh right there in their right there in the shtibel. That I mean, I'm just curious to know why if it's sold that you can't take into account the fact that it could be a mikveh, because that does have higher kedusha than a bathroom or or a tannery, I would think.
Because a mikvah, right, is a place where it is used, even though it's used for a sacred purpose, it's used in the same manner a bathhouse is used, and therefore it can be looked upon as if you're taking a synagogue and turning it into a bathhouse. And so therefore you might think that a bathhouse you're not allowed to, but a mikveh you are allowed to. So it comes to tell us that no, even as a bathhouse, even as a mikveh, you shouldn't use it for the same reason why you should use it as a bathhouse, because of the kedusha of the base Knesset. Now, yes, it's true. There are synagogues that also have a mikvah, just like synagogues also have bathrooms, but you're not taking the synagogue and making it into a bathroom. That's a whole different story. And the same thing with a mikvah. You can't take a synagogue and make it into a mikvah, right? Because of the same principle. It's just it's not a respectful conversion. Okay, you're making a conversion from a synagogue into something which is not appropriate.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
along the same lines of what Moshe is saying, isn't there a halacha that a town that has a certain amount of money, they have to have a mikveh for the women to have taras mishpacha, and that is even more important than having a shul?
Absolutely, a mikveh is one of the first things you need to build, because that's the generations that are to be born depend on a mikveh. Absolutely, so it's very high up there. But again, here the only question is not whether a mikveh is important or not, but whether you could take a synagogue itself, which has kedusha, and then convert that into a mikveh in its entirety. And the answer is one shouldn't. That's what we're saying over here. According to Rameh, that is, right?
Rabbi,
Okay.
I'm sorry. So what happens when they make these synagogues in a storefront?
right? So
and then they move out, and then the other people come in and make another business in that store that was a synagogue.
So my understanding is that what they do is lechatchila, when they designate it as a shul, they designate it as a temporary shul. It's different when you designate something as a temporary shul, right? Which you, in the first instance, intend to move out of, and this is only for like an ad hoc synagogue that you're making, not a permanent structure, a permanent edifice that's going to serve as a synagogue for the community. Then the laws that govern it are going to be different laws, going to be different halachas. Whereas when you're building a shul for the purpose of a shul for permanence, then it's very different. And the truth is that in many instances, the shul that is built is created not as a shul. You should know a shul, a synagogue, doesn't need to have a mezuzah. Okay?
No, because the Torah.
It doesn't. Whereas you find many synagogues, if not all synagogues, they all have mezuzahs, and the reason is because they stipulate that it shouldn't be a base knesses in the strict definition of the word, so that the laws governing it are a lot more lax, and it's more flexible. You know, you're not allowed to eat in a synagogue, right? In every shul you go to, they're all eating, right? A kiddush here, a kiddush there. So the reason is because they stipulate when they make the shul that it shouldn't be a beit knesses proper as we understand it. Okay, let's go a bit further. So
You auction off those mezuzahs. Good money on those mezuzahs.
Yeah. Okay. So now, according to the Gemara says, like, according to Remeah, right? The people have to what? They have to stipulate that if they want to sell this shul, if they get the money and they decide that they want to buy it back, this guy has to sell it back to them. So now the Gemara has a question on how Remeah could allow such a thing. And according to Remeah, how can a person who purchases this shul, right, knowing that he may have to sell it back to them, how could he ever live in it? Why? Ribis. It's interest. Think about it. I come along and I sell you my shul, right? And you pay me money for that shul. And then I come along a year later and say, I want to buy it back. And now you have to let me buy it back. I pay you the same money. However, you now have, so to speak, lent me money for a year, received the money back, and you've had the benefit of living in my house. Living in the shul, right? That's ribis. That's at least, if it's not ribis deraisa, but it's at least ribis derabanan, right? Because you've gained an extra benefit from the loan that you've given me, okay? Because the sale's not a real sale. If the sale is just so that you could get money because your cash flow is not the way you want it, the way you need it, right? And so therefore you get all this money from me, right? Or whatever, I get the money from you by selling this, and you're going to sell it back to me. So really it's a loan. And at the end of the day, you managed to live in this for the period of time that I had the money out. That's called ribis. So how could Rabbi allow for this? Okay. So and for the Gemara, Rabbi Yechon says, Reb Meir b'shitas Rabbi Yehuda Amra. Reb Meir said his ruling in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Oma, Rabbi Yehuda says, Sad echad beribis mutar. A transaction which involves interest in only one aspect is permitted, which means like this. When I lend you money, right? If I lend you money, and there's only one possible scenario, which most probably won't happen, or at least it's not necessary for it to happen, in which case I would have earned interest, and we say in that case, it's not considered interest. So let's take this example of it from our Mishnah. I buy a property for $100, right? Now, it's quite possible that I will never get the money back from you because you may keep the purchase as a final sale, right? So in that case, if later on you turn around and say, I do want to buy it back, because there was only a remote chance, only a remote chance of this happening. It's only one possible scenario where it would end up being ribis. So we say in that case, that's not considered real ribis. Real ribis is where it's for sure, you're guaranteed that you're going to get, it's guaranteed that you're going to get interest, okay? The Tanya, so as we saw in the Brisa here, it gives an example. The Tanya was one in the Brisa, Hare, if one guy was coming to collect from his fellow Amana, right? And the guy doesn't have. So what does he do? So in order to placate the creditor, so the debtor made a sale of his fields to the creditor. He says, here you go. You can have this field. When the seller, meaning the guy who owes the money, right? When he's the one that is still eating the fruit during the period of time from when he sells it till when he actually pays up what he owes, mutter, that's fine. In such a case, right, the guy is really only holding on to the field as collateral, right? And so therefore it's fine. But if the guy who's owed the money, who purchased the field in order to be able to take it as collateral, if during that period of time he's eating from the fruit of the field, also that's prohibited because that's ribis. Rabbi Yehuda says no. Even if the buyer takes the produce, then it's still permitted, and the Gemara will explain why it's going to be permitted. So, but Rabbi Yehuda says, there was actually a story, Baisus ben Zunan, by this guy, who he made a sale of his field to the guy who he owes money. And he did so with the direction of Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. And in this case, the buyer took the produce, and therefore it seems that this was done with the okay of Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah, which was from a previous generation. So he's using this to bolster his view and to say that this is support. So the Chacham said, Misham Raya, you're going to bring a proof from there. That's not what happened. It's not that the Lekeya, the creditor who came to purchase the field, it's not him, it's not he who ate the fruits, but rather, it was the seller who kept eating the produce despite having sold the field, and not the buyer. So therefore, you misunderstood the facts of the case. So that's not a good proof. Okay, going back to the Brisa, we had the Chachamim, the Tanakama of the Brisa, saying that it's forbidden to eat for the buyer to eat the fruit, and Rabbi Yehuda is saying that it's permissible. So the Gemara asks, "My benayu, what is the difference between the two views?" So he says the difference between the two views is tzad echad beribis ike benayu, whether a transaction that involves interest in only one aspect is that's the difference between them. Marsova tzad echad beribis muta. Rabbi Yehuda says that the transaction where there's only one aspect of ribis that is permitted, which means to say that it's only going to be ribis, right, if the person who owes the money comes back and buys the field back. But if he doesn't buy the field back, right, which is a plausible scenario, then the guy eating the fruit is eating from his own fruit, so it's not ribis. The only time it's going to be ribis is if the guy actually comes back and pays and buys the field back. So since it's not for sure going to happen, so therefore he says in that case that kind of ribis is going to be permitted. Omar Sova, and the other one, Tanakama holds that tzadech ribis also, that even if you have a situation where there's only one aspect where it could become ribis, nevertheless, in such a scenario, it would be forbidden. Okay, now that's one way to interpret the Brisa. However, Rava says there's another way to understand this Brisa and understand the view of the dispute over here, the views of the disputants. He says, Kula Alma we could say that both the Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda hold tzad echad beribis also, that both of them hold that even in the case where there's only one aspect in where this could become ribis, it's still forbidden. Everybody agrees that, even Rabbi Yehuda. But over here in this case, it was ribis. The difference between the two opinions would be if that the question is like this: can I eat this fruit from this field which I purchased, which you might purchase back from me, right? On condition that when that sale, the final sale comes through, which means you purchase it back, then any money that I gained from eating from the fruit, I'm going to return it to you. So even though I've eaten it already, so therefore I've already, in a way, taken ribis, but because I'm taking it on condition to give it back, so therefore it will be considered ribis on condition to repay it. Is that permitted or not? Mar Sova, Rabbi Yehuda would hold that what? That ribis amanas lahachzir muta, where you're going to have ribis on the interest on condition that it's going to be returned. Rabbi Yehuda is going to say that is permissible, and that's why he allows for the sale. And he allows for the purchaser to eat the fruit during that time. Or Mar Sova, and the other, to the Tanakama, the rabbis hold that also it's forbidden. Even if it's amanas lahachzir, it's still forbidden. And so therefore, if a guy is in dire straits and he needs to sell his property to the creditor, the creditor can buy yield, but he cannot eat the fruit, right? During that period until the guy comes back and redeems his field and buys it back and pays the guy back what he owes. Okay, so that's that. Okay. The rabbis who disagree with Rebbe Meir, they say you don't have to make any stipulations in the sale, but you can take the shul and you can sell it permanently, right? Now, the only thing the rabbi said was that with regards to selling a shul, you shouldn't sell it directly to somebody who's going to use it for any of these disgraceful uses, like a tannery or whatever. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel. I'm not sure what exactly the. Oh no, I do know what the connection is. Okay, Muta la'adam lahashtin mayim b'toich dalad amas shel tefillah. A person is allowed to urinate within 4 amas of a place where he is going to pray. Okay, you're allowed to urinate within 4 amas. So the Gemara comes along and says, Rabbi Yosef, my kabash malon, why do I need Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel to tell me this halacha? Tanina, we've already learned this in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, this is from our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda said, that one could sell it as a courtyard, and then so then the buyer can do whatever he wants with it. So if the buyer can do whatever he wants with it, which means he could even turn it into a bathhouse, he could even turn it into a bathroom, right? So if that's something that you could do even in a shul, how much more so me in my own private property, I can urinate within 4 amas of where I'm praying. So why do I need you to tell me that? I can already derive this from the Mishnah. Yeah, and even the rabbis of the Mishnah who say you cannot use it as a urinal, they say this only with regards to a shul. The Kviya Kedusha say who sanctifies permanent avol dalad amas, but with regards to 4 amas place of prayer, the like Kviya Kedusha say whose sanctity is not permanent, meaning the site hasn't been designated for prayer. In other words, a person davens in all different places in his house. So then, even the rabbis will agree that there's no restrictions. If that's the case, why do I need Rabbi Yehuda to tell me in the name of Rabbi Shmuel that a person can pray can urinate within 4 amas of where he has or he will pray? That's the question. The Gemara doesn't come with a solution for this. It doesn't answer the question. It just leaves it as it is. Okay, we don't have an explanation why we need the halacha of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. So, but now once we've already started talking about this topic, the Gemara continues on this topic. and it says Tana was taught in a brisa. Tana Kame de Rabbi Yechon. There was a Tana who taught this in front of Rav Nachman. Excuse me, not Rabbi Yechon, Rav Nachman. He says Hamispalel, one who has prayed Marchim Dalad Amos or Mashti. He should distance himself 4 amos from where he prayed, and there he may urinate. And one who has urinated, he should distance himself 4 amos, and then he can pray, which means to say, it seems that this is not in accordance with the ruling that we said of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Okay, it seems that this Tana taught a brisa that says you're not allowed to do that. Amalei, so Rav Nachman says to him, it's all good when you talk about the ruling that somebody who's urinated should distance himself 4 amos, and only then he can pray. That I understand. Tanina, because we learned that in the Mishnah. Kamar yarchik mehen uminatzaya. How much must one distance himself from urine or from excrement before he's permitted to pray? Dalad amos. So that ruling I understand. Elhamisbalel, marchik dalad amos umashtin. That when you tell me the ruling, the one who has already prayed, he should distance himself 4 amos from the site of where he prayed, and then he's allowed to urinate. This doesn't make sense. Lumally, why is it necessary for me to distance myself 4 amos from a place where I prayed? If this would be the case, you've effectively, basically consecrated all the places of Nardoy, because people at one point or another may have prayed in the street, may have prayed somewhere in this area of Nardoy, and so wherever you are, you're not going to be able to go anywhere to relieve yourself. Again, understand that in those days they didn't quite have the same toilet systems that we have today. So therefore, people just went to the side at times to be able to relieve themselves. So now, if you're in a place like Nardoy, so therefore, anywhere you're going to walk, there may have been somebody who prayed there. So if you're going to say that a person, if he wants to, if he goes and he relieves himself, he has to distance himself 4 amos from where he's relieved himself, that makes sense. But if you're going to tell me that once you've already prayed, right, if now you want to go and relieve yourself, you need to go 4 amos away from where you prayed, you've made a problem for the whole the whole area of Nardoy, right? So
Rabbi, these days you get arrested for exposure.
exactly. So Rav Nachman concludes, Tinei instead of teaching that you should distance yourself, rather you should just change a word over there, and you should write, instead of yarchik, you should say yisheh. Yisheh dalad amos, which means that you wait the amount of time it takes to walk 4 amos before relieving yourself. In other words, if you've prayed, right, now, instead of going and relieving yourself immediately on the spot, right there, at least wait the amount of time it takes to walk 4 amos before you relieve yourself. Okay. So now the Gemara examines the Brisa in light of
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't catch that whole idea of that the bathrooms are different and the urine's carried away. Just say that again, just in one sentence.
What I'm saying is that back in those days, people would go out to an open space and they would relieve themselves in an open space, right? I'm not talking about when they would sit. I'm talking about when they just had to do, relieve themselves, right? So they would go to an open space, make sure that they're not exposed publicly, and then they would relieve themselves, right? Now the question is, what happens if I'm walking along the road, right? And I want to pray. If you're going to tell me, no, the other way around. If everybody is going to pray in the streets as they at occasion will do, right, then it would never be possible to ever go and relieve yourself in a public place, ever, right? So therefore, Reb Nachman rejects this ruling to say that in order to be able to relieve yourselves, you have to distance yourself 4 amos from the place where someone prayed. Rather, the ruling should be understood as any time a person is praying and he finishes praying and he wants to relieve himself, he should at least wait the amount of time that it takes to walk 4 amos. Okay.
Okay, so in modern times, this halacha wouldn't necessarily apply because of the fact that the urine is carried away by the sanitation system.
Well, not just that, but the place where we go to relieve ourselves is a designated area which is never designated for prayer. In other words, nobody ever prays in a bathroom.
Right, I get it. Okay.
Okay. Says the Gemara, it's all good to say that you should just, with regards to urinating, you should wait the amount of time that it walks to, that it takes to walk 4 amos. That's fine. Because of the drops, right? In other words, when it comes to urinating, sometimes there are a few drops that continue to issue forth. So it's best that a person should wait briefly before readjusting and before praying, right? Ella mispalel yishek kedei hilach dal damas. But the ruling that one who has prayed should wait as long as it takes 4 amos before going to urinate. Lamali. Why do I need that? Why do you have to wait after prayer before urinating? So the Gemara answers, Amar of Ashi, Shekol Damas Dalad Amos Tfilosei Sudura B'fiv. Because the amount of time that it takes to walk 4 amos, a person's prayer is still fluent in his mouth, and his lips are still moving, enunciating the words of prayer, which means to say as follows. Sometimes, right, because many people know the prayers by heart, so even though they sense that they finished, but it could be that your lips are still moving, you're still kind of uttering some of the words for the time that it takes to walk 4 amos. It doesn't take a long time to walk 4 amos. It takes 2 seconds, right? 3 seconds to walk 4 amos. But the point is that it could be you think that you finished davening, but your lips are still moving. You're still kind of saying the last few words of davening. So therefore, you shouldn't rush and go and relieve yourself the second you think you finished davening. Give it a few seconds, 2 or 3 seconds. Again, we're not talking about half a minute or a minute. We're talking about a few seconds. Just, compose yourself and make sure that you're not still davening and you're not still involved in your davening. You're actually relieving yourself. Okay, that's that.
But Rabbi,
yes.
What about your talents and your tefillin and?
Well, we're talking about a few things.
What are you talking about, Ma'ariv and Mincha?
Well, no. First of all, it's not so simple that you can't go to the bathroom while you're wearing a tallis. We don't. We personally don't.
No, because we have to go we have to go into the room, the restroom.
We're saying that he's not going into a room.
Right, he's going to the field.
Right. So therefore, it's not so simple that he has to take off his tallis.
That's my question.
Right. No, it's not necessary for him to take off his tallis, and even the shel yad is not so simple. Shel rosh he should take off. But anyway, the point is, as far as this is concerned, in terms of how long one should wait the amount of time it takes to walk 4 amos before they go and relieve themselves after davening, to make sure that you finish davening. Okay, so now, once we mentioned that a person should behave in a particular manner, right? So we're going to mention stories about rabbis who were asked why they merited to live so long. And they're going to mention some of the practices that they were very careful of. Zalfon Simon. So this is a mnemonic to remember who the rabbis are that were asked by the Talmidim why they lived so long. Shalu Talmidim Reb Zakkai. Reb Zakkai was asked by his students, but on what account, right, have you attained longevity? Malahem. So he said to them, because in all my days, I never urinated within 4 amos of my place of prayer. Even though we just said, right, that it was permitted, right? We just said what it means is you should only wait that amount of time. He made sure never to urinate within 4 amos of where he had prayed. And I never used a nickname for my fellow. In other words, we're not talking even about a derogatory nickname, which that is forbidden. We're talking about even one that might make somebody feel uncomfortable. He never used a nickname for referring to a friend. And I never neglected to recite Kiddush on Shabbos day over wine, even though we know that when it comes to Kiddush, the main Kiddush is Friday night, right? Shabbos day, it's not as important. I'm not saying it's not important. It's very important, but it's not as important for as Friday night, right? You could do it other ways. You could make it on challah. You can be yoked with somebody else. But he was careful. He made sure never to neglect saying Kiddush on Shabbos day. And it tells us the following story about him. Imaz Kena Hoysali. Reb Zakkai tells that he had an elderly mother. Pam Achas, there was one time where I didn't have the money, right? Machra Kipa Shibaresha, she sold the veil that she wore on her head, Ve'viali Kiddush Hayom, and she brought me the Kiddush of the day, the wine for the Kiddush of the day, right? For the daytime, because that she was able to buy with the purchase of her veil. Obviously, this was before Shabbos, right? She didn't go sell it on Shabbos. She realized that there wasn't going to be enough wine. She went and she sold the scarf or her veil, and with the money she purchased Kiddush, wine, so that he should be able to have enough wine for Kiddush by day. Tana was taught in a brisa with regards to Zakkai's wife. It says, Shemesa, when his mother passed away, she left for him 300 barrels of wine. In other words, he was so careful for Kiddush by day that she would do everything she could to gather more and more and more wine so that he would never have a shortage of wine for Shabbos day, for Kiddush on Shabbos day. Reb Zakkai died, he left over for his children 3,000 barrels of wine, which means to say it was a bit of an obsession to make sure that he never runs out of wine. He never runs out of wine for Kiddush by day. So now, once we're already talking about one Reb Zakkai who was careful with Kiddush, so too we say about Reb Huna. Reb Huna have a aser risa v'kokame derav. Reb Huna girded himself with a grass belt, and he stood in front of Rav Amalei. So Rav said to him, "My high, where's your regular belt? Why are you wearing this grass belt? Well, what is this about?" Amalei says to him, "Lehavale kiddusha. I didn't have money for wine. So what did I do? Mashkante lehemyonai. I took my belt and I gave it as collateral to be able to va'asiyabei kiddusha, and I was able to buy wine for Kiddush." Amalei, so Rav said back to him, "Yehi Ravo, may it be the will of Hashem, the situm b'shiroi, that you should be covered with silk. You didn't have money, so much so that you had to sell your belt in order to be able to buy wine for Kiddush. So I bless you that you should be covered with silk." What happened? Ki iklal Rabbi, when Rav Huna's son Rabba was married, right? Rav Huna inish gutzahava. Rav Huna was a short person. Gona apuria. So he was sleeping on a bed, right? And I guess people didn't really notice him, right? Osyan b'nosei v'kalose. His daughters and his daughter-in-laws came in, and they didn't really notice that he was lying there on the bed. Sholchan v'shadyan minayu alei. They took off the silk garments and they threw it on him, like they just, dropped it off. They had these silk garments until he was entirely covered with silk. In other words, he was so well off that he was able to buy silk garments for all of his daughters and his daughters-in-law. And when they came in to the house one time and he was lying there, they covered him with the silk, not realizing, and thereby the bracha that he had received from Rav was actually fulfilled in reality, right? So the Gemara concludes that Shama Rav heard about this. He heard how his bracha was fulfilled, the ikmid, and he was upset. Omar, he said to him, he said to Rav Huna, my time aloi amartli, why didn't you say to me, ki berachtich, when I blessed you, v'chein lama? You should have responded to me, and so too for the master. In other words, if I give you a bracha and you see my bracha was fulfilled, had you said v'chein lama, right? If you said, and so too you, then I would have also been blessed, right, with this blessing, and I'd also be well off. I'd also be financially well-to-do. So he was upset that he didn't give this response of v'chein lama. And this is the source from where, when you give people the blessings, very often they'll say v'chein lama, you too, right? You too. So I heard an interesting story. There was a guy who used to walk around saying that, it says in the Talmud that you should never take lightly the blessing of a simpleton. A simple person who gives a blessing, it's something that you should never make light of. So he said, I saw this with myself, because I gave Reb Chaim Kanevsky a bracha and it was fulfilled, and he gave me a bracha and it wasn't fulfilled. What was that? He says, I gave him a bracha that he should finish learning the whole Talmud this year. And he said back to me, v'chein lama, and so you too. So Reb Chaim Kanevsky finished the whole Shas that year, as he did every year, but I didn't. So you see, my blessing was fulfilled and his wasn't. And that's a joke. All right. Weiter in the Gemara. So
But Rabbi, if the Rabbi complains that he didn't bless him back, it wasn't a generous blessing that he gave.
What do you mean?
If he gave a blessing to somebody, you don't complain later about not getting a blessing back.
No, what he's saying is what he's saying.
I understand what he said.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Well,
it's not a nice thing to tell somebody, why didn't you bless me back?
Well, yes and no. It depends. If this is your student and you're teaching them manners, you're teaching them what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So he's teaching him a lesson that when somebody gives you a blessing, the appropriate thing to do is to say v'chein lama. And from this story, you have throughout the centuries up until today, people, when they receive a blessing, they say v'chein lama because of this story. So therefore, it was actually a good thing that he did it in order to teach us how we're supposed to behave appropriately when we receive a blessing.
Okay.
One more. Let's do one more story. It says the Gemara as follows: Shalu Talmidav es Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. The disciples of Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua asked, on account of what have you attained longevity, that you live a long life? Amma lahem, he said to them, Miyamai lo yasisi kapandaria lebeis knesses. All my days I never used the shul as a shortcut. Right? You're not supposed to use the shul as a shortcut. If you need to get from one place to another place, and walking through the shul is going to take you less time than to go around, you're supposed to go around. Right? So he says, I never used it as a shortcut. What people have accustomed to do today is that if you're walking through a synagogue, because that's the only way to get to the other place, but nevertheless, you're using it as a pathway. What we do is we sit down for a moment and we say a verse in the synagogue, so it can be seen that I'm coming into the shul and doing something sacred in it. I'm saying a verse, and then I'm going to continue on. Not, and I'm just coming in and I'm using as a shortcut. Okay, and he says, "V'lepasati al rashi am kadosh," and I never stepped over the heads of people of the holy nation. What does that mean? That means the way the synagogue and the base of medrash would be is people would sit in rows, right? And since they would sit in rows, if you're walking in from the back, you have to climb over. And since you have to climb over the head, because you have to climb over the heads, so therefore, what it looks like is you're stepping on their heads. So what he said is that he never would step over people over there, which would look like he's stepping on their heads. What he would do is either he would go around or he would come there early. He would come there before so that he never had to do that. And I never raised my hands to give the blessing without first making a bracha. In other words, the way you're supposed to do brichas kainim is you're supposed to make a bracha and then you raise and then give the bracha. So he says, I never gave the bracha without first making a blessing. And we'll stop here. I wish you all an easy fast. Make sure you hydrate
Which-
yourself. Lots of-
Rabbi, is
lots of
this
water. Yes.
a different bracha on top of the one that the
No,
Kohanim
no.
normally give?
No, the regular bracha.
So why would did they used to do that back in the old days without saying bracha beforehand?
So it seems the Mefarshim are troubled like you. That what does this mean? I mean, everybody's supposed to make a bracha before you do brachas kohanim. So what some of the Mefarshim suggest is that all kohanim, by saying a bracha before doing brachas kohanim, they're causing for themselves longevity. It's not something that is unique to him. He's mentioning a number of things. So one of the things that he's mentioning is that making a bracha before giving brachas kohanim is something that has blessed me with long life. But he mentions other things that also he felt contributed to his longevity. But it's a good point. Yes, this is something that not just him, but all kohanim need to do before you give brachas kohanim. You have to make a bracha.
Rabbi,
right.
when you said in August, do you have a date in August, or we have to wait?
I think it's the 20th of August. If you check the email that Rabbi Smith sent out a while back, it says I think the 20th of August is when it recommences. I think Gimel Elul. That's my understanding.
And when does it start?
Gimel Elul.
When does it start, the break?
Today,
As of tomorrow, starting tomorrow.
So we have no shear tomorrow, and that's it. There's no shear after tomorrow.
That's
That's
correct.
my understanding. Unless he tells me otherwise, that's my
I'm
understanding.
panicking. Okay. Fleischig and Tisha B'Av.
Amen. All right. Have an easy fast and
You too, Rabbi.
Kiddush
Thank you very
Levana
much.
Yerushalayim.
Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Amen. Thank you very much, Rabbi. Thank
No
you.
problem. All the best, everybody.